Yeah, you can take me there. Yeah, you can take me there.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building an awesome 3070 based gaming PC build for 2022. I'll be pairing it up with the latest Z690 motherboard, 12th gen Intel CPU, and some great hardware that not only looks fantastic, but performs admirably at 1080p and 1440p in the latest AAA titles. Not only will I be running you through these components, but the build process itself too, before booting the system up later to check out those all-important performance figures. Let's do this. Now, as with any build, I'm going to kick things off by looking at the core components first off, and that entails our motherboard, the RAM or the memory, our Gen 4 NVMe storage, and of course the processor. Now this right here is the Intel Core i5-12600K. Boasting Intel's brand new performance and efficiency cores, is an awesome chip that can be overclocked, doesn't run too hot, and basically destroys the Ryzen 5 5600X by huge margins. We're talking like 50-60%, which is absolutely nuts. Now, to install the CPU, we need to of course pick up a Z690 motherboard. And there's no better option than the Prime Z690p D4 for those on a little bit of a budget. Now, don't get me wrong, this board is hardly cheap, and it's hardly the best match for something like a 3050 or even a 1660 from last generation. But it does give you support for overclocking on the 12th gen architecture at a price point that doesn't break the bank. Plus, it supports this stuff, DDR4, rather than the pricier and newer DDR5 memory. More on that later though. For now, we're going to go ahead and install the CPU. You'll see with the new Intel generation that the socket has actually changed significantly. Pulling the arm up is still the same, but once you do so, the socket itself just stays there, sits still like a lemon. So what we need to do is pull it up, and it opens in kind of like a gullwing design. We can then go ahead and pick up our Intel CPU and install this into the socket. Line up your triangles as usual, go into the bottom left-hand side of the socket, drop the chip in and give it a bit of a wiggle. Push the socket cover down yourself and the black plastic will pop off, then secure it with your retention arm. It's a little bit of a different installation process, and it is more delicate than the last generation, as we've learnt the hard way, so don't make that mistake. Let's come back to that memory we talked about though, specifically this stuff, Corsair's Vengeance RGB RS. 16 gigabytes of this memory is going to work well, but 32 gigs is also a great alternative. We're at that point nowadays where 16 and 32 are kind of a bit blurred. Obviously, the more memory, the better. But if you're trying to not go exuberant and spend loads and loads of cash, 16 might be a better shout. You can always pick up an identical kit later and add it, and they'll work together for 32 gigs of memory on this dual channel board. One area that we haven't particularly scrimped though is on the storage front, where Seagate's FIRECUDA 530 gives us 1TB of Gen 4 NVMe storage. You get read speeds of 7,000 megabytes per second, pretty standard for Gen 4 SSDs, but also write speeds of 7,000 megabytes a second too. That means not only is loading up your games going to be quicker, but copying and writing files is blazingly fast. This has been widely reviewed as the best Gen 4 NVMe drive out there right now for consumer systems, and Seagate really are onto a winner with the FIRECUDA 530, and it's good to see someone really do something different in the storage space. GG's Seagate. And then when you've done that, we can clear the rest of the boxes from the table because we're ready to move this complete motherboard assembly over into the case choice for this build, Corsair's legendary 5000D Airflow. Having laid the case down flat for nice ease of use, I'm just going to remove the tempered glass side panel, as that will make installing the motherboard the next step a lot easier. Now, typically high-end motherboards would come with built-in I/O shields, but our system today doesn't have one of those. It has a manual metal one that we're going to click in instead. It goes to the rear of the motherboard through this rectangular cutout, and you should locate the circular audio ports at the bottom, with your old-style PS2 large circle keyboard and mouse connections at the top. If you're confused, just match up your I/O with the one we've installed and you shouldn't have any problems. It's also at this stage we'd usually check which holes on the motherboard match up with the standoffs. But with this being a large full-size ATX tower and our motherboard being an ATX design, all the holes are going to be in the right place. The only thing that's really a bit unusual about this board is these standoffs here, which are actually too large for the motherboard. It's sort of an ATX but a little bit thinner on the right hand side, giving us only 2 screws at the top, 2 along the middle and 2 down the bottom, rather than 3 on each row. It just makes things a bit simpler actually, giving us only 5 that we actually need to screw down, as our centre standoff is raised, holding the motherboard in place for this stage of the process. And then once that's done, we can install the cooler. Absolutely flying. In particular for this build, I've gone for the DEEPCOOL Castle 360. This is the updated version of quite a popular cooler actually from DEEPCOOL. It is 360mm, but it's more priced as like a 240mm, so while it is slightly overkill for the build, I figured why not? If they're going to include it for this price, we may as well take advantage of that. You can see here we've got 3 120mm fans with these little rubber stoppers on each corner. That will help limit vibrations, expand the lifespan of the fan, all that jazz. And the whole thing just comes very nicely packaged. No damage to the radiator or anything like that. Now, I think for this build, we could either install the radiator at the front with the fans pulling air in this way, or we could go for a kind of a showcase installation where we pop the radiator horizontally, just to eyeball it and see how that looks. That would look a little something like that. And I think actually that's sort of a configuration I would quite like to try out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the fans on to make sure we've got airflow. I'm going to pop the radiator with the case upright, as we need to access the screws through the back. What we will need to do then is install some intake fans on the top of the case, an unusual config I admit, and then these will act as exhaust. Nothing wrong with this, it's still going to keep our temperatures nice and low as you'll see later, but it just stops all of our fans in the whole case from all being intake, something that's quite important to bear in mind. So for the next stage of the cooler, we need to pop the water block on, and to do that you need to consult your manual, which I've laid out just here. This has an Intel on one side and an AMD on the other side, and what that's instructing us to do is to pick up this. This is a backplate. One side says Intel, like the instructions, and the other AMD. What we're going to do is we're going to clip on some black plastic clips onto each corner and some screws all the way through. That will form the basis for us to actually fasten the cooler down to. So take these screws, pop them through the outermost hole, then take your black plastic stopper and pop this over the top. And that basically, from what I can see, is it. So we need to repeat that for all 4 corners. Then we're going to pop that through the rear of our motherboard. Then to round things off, we need to add these brackets to the water block, pop the water block over the screws we just popped through the rear of the motherboard, and fasten it down with these thumb screws. With the cooler in and looking really quite good in my opinion, we can next move on to the GPU. Now, in the current climate, basically anything that's a 60 Ti, 70 or 70 Ti, you can actually buy at a reasonable price is what I'd recommend. But for this build, specifically I'm recommending the TUF 3070. It's my favourite 3070 out there as far as value goes, primarily because you get one of the largest, bulkiest 3-fan coolers and an MSRP that's competitive with some of the smaller 2-fan design. The TUF cooler is a bit bare bones. You'll see there's a lot of shroud and in places not the heatsink that matches quite up, but the cooling solution is nevertheless very, very, very good, and you'll get some nice factory overclocks on the 3070 chip too. In this case, you could technically install it horizontally, or you could go for a vertical GPU installation, which would position the card somewhere about here. Now today I think I'm going to go boring. I'm going to put it in the normal fashion, and that's because with the tempered glass side panel on, there's not a great deal of room for airflow, something Corsair have fixed in new and upcoming cases. What we're going to do then is pull the case just a little bit closer. That was a little bit close for my liking, and then we can push back the clip on the PCI slot, the top grey one to be precise. Once you've done that, you can slide the GPU in. It will click nicely into place with a satisfying click sound. You can see by default it's a bit saggy at the moment, so we need to pop in a pair of screws to fasten it down and stop it from going anywhere. With the GPU in and looking pretty good then, we can move on to the power supply. Now, for a build like this, any 750 watt 80 plus gold unit's gonna work well. But today, we've gone for this lovely ASUS STRIX version. This build has a bit of an ASUS and Corsair theme going on, and this rounds that off nicely. Look how good the design of that unit looks. Nice red accenting, nice beefy 120mm fan to keep the unit cool, fully modular cables, you name it. this power supply has it all. Now this build won't be a full cables and wiring guide, but we have got one of those on the channel. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and add in all the cables we need, screw the power supply into the case, and then boot it up for the first time to see just how well it performs. Before that though, we've got to see how good it looks in an epic glam montage, in the only way we know how here on the channel. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage.
Yeah, you can take me there.
Looking good. Now that the system's all ready to go, we may as well boot it up and test out some gaming titles. And we've tested over 10 of the latest and most popular games. Everything from your AAA titles to your CSGOs, Valorants and Fortnites. We've covered it all, and you can find kind of a summary of our results on your screen now. You can also find the raw benchmark runs for all of the games we tested out over on our benchmarking YouTube channel, a link to which can be found in the description below. For now though, let's take a closer look at some of these titles and check out those all-important performance figures. Starting off with Battlefield 2042. Here we tested out at 1440p high settings and of course enabled DLSS. We managed to pull in more than 100 frames per second on average, 104 to be precise, with 91 and 82 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. Visually, the game looked great, and Nvidia's DLSS is an awesome way to supercharge your frame rate. This is also pretty prominent in COD Vanguard, where we tested out first at 1440p high with no DLSS, and then we turned it on, set it to performance mode to see what difference it'd make. First off, we got 86 frames per second at 1440p high, pretty vanilla. Enabling DLSS supercharged our frame rate up to 127. You heard me right, more than 40 frames per second difference. Around a 50% performance jump just by enabling DLSS. And it's a pattern that continued later on in our other DLSS compatible titles. Before that though, Forza Horizon 5. A game where we tested at 1440p Ultra and achieved more than 100 frames per second. I was impressed by these numbers, considering just how difficult Forza Horizon 5 is to run. We tested using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, as we always do when it's included, because it gives fairer, more repeatable, and much more easy to gather results for you guys. Next up is Halo Infinite. Here we tested out at 1440p high settings once again. You might be wondering, James, why aren't we testing at 1080p? Well, the 3070 is just designed for 1440p gaming. And in titles like Apex Legends, the frame rate you get won't be too dissimilar, because it sort of caps out at 150 at both resolutions. So you may as well get the extra visual detail and fidelity to match. Here we pulled in 75 frames per second on average, with 70 and 64 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, which show the frame rate never really dropped below that 64 mark. Keeping nice and consistent. Moving on to Apex Legends next up then, here at 1440p high settings, we managed to surpass the all-important 100 frames per second mark, specifically gathering 103 FPS on average. The frame rate never really dropped below 80 either, showing some really consistent results. This system is not short of power, and my goodness, does it show. To round things off, we also tested out the likes of Fortnite and Warzone. Fortnite, first of all, at 1080p competitive settings. This is a game we make an exception, given just how well its frame rate can scale. Here we got 235 FPS on average, with 205 and 177 for the 90 and the 99th percentile results. While Call of Duty's Warzone was tested at 1440p high with DLSS enabled. Here we pulled in 119 frames per second. A number that was just about 40 frames per second higher than with DLSS disabled, showing just how much of a winner Nvidia have got on their hands with DLSS 2.0. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.